Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Hamlin. Gunnar, how are you doing?
Doing good. I'm tired, but probably not as tired as you, so I can't really complain, unfortunately. But how you doing, Spencer?
Tired's a good word for it. Yep, I'm pretty tired. Um, no, but we're getting close here to starting our season. 6 days until opening day for our season, so I'm excited to get that going. Get done with some of these late night practices and get into the real games and stuff. So definitely looking forward to it. And I mean, speaking of baseball, we got a lot of baseball stuff that we've got coming up here soon. So before we get into any of that, if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And as we kind of hinted at there, today is going to be a Brewers focused episode.
Then today we are going to be talking about we got a couple small trades with Clayton Andrews and Ethan Small. We don't have much on those, but we did get an interesting prospect for one of those guys. Then we got the latest on Gary Sanchez and all that fiasco that's going on with him right now. We thought maybe he'd be a Brewer, but looks like it might be a little bit in limbo right now. And then our first reactions to what we've gotten of spring training so far. And we got a nice little tidbit here. Sal Frelick, maybe an infielder, second baseman, third baseman. We're about to find out. So without further ado, Spencer, let's slide into our main topics. First main topic here is we did mention the small trades that we made. Recently, DFA'd left-handed reliever Clayton Andrews was traded to the New York Yankees in exchange for 19-year-old Nicaraguan pitcher Joshua Quesada. I feel like I was pretty close on that.
Quezada,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So Spencer, how about you take this one away since you're probably more excited about the prospect that we got than I am.
Sure. So I do want to point out, I thought it was kind of interesting that the Yankees in particular, which is their team that's done pretty well with like bullpen revitalizations, and they tend to take chances on some of these guys, and they do pretty well with them. The Brewers are also a team who have had a lot of success in that type of transaction. So I thought it was interesting that the Yankees took a chance on him. You look at Andrews, and really the big thing for me is that I think the slider and the changeup are both really, really good secondaries. Like the changeup could be really good. The slider shows a lot of flashes of being really good. Unfortunately, at the MLB level, his fastball was just batting practice. I mean, it got absolutely destroyed in his small sample. My thought going into the offseason was that the Brewers were going to try and either make it a cutter or a sinker or something else because he was basically just throwing a dead zone four seam fastball that coming from a 5'6" arm slot, just it's going to get crushed. Um, Looking at what it sucks to see him go for me. He was a guy that I was pretty excited about. I do think it was partially just because it was such a weird profile, such an abnormal profile, where it's a 5'6" guy, and I think that might be generous. I'm not sure that dude is 5'6". He looks more like 5'3" to 5'5", somewhere in that range, maybe. Who could throw mid 90s? Like it's an impressive athlete. Like I said, two good secondaries. He had a really cool, I think he was a 16th or 17th round pick in the draft. Um, he was actually a two-way for 2 years, where he was kind of like moonlighting as the starting center fielder for the Mudcats at one point. And he hit like 300, but he had zero pop. Obviously, as someone that small, he just wasn't going to be able to generate much pop. Um, but he's just a really cool prospect to follow, a really fun one to follow, who kind of dominated AAA, and it was awesome to see him get his chance. Obviously, it didn't go very well, but I do think it's super interesting that the Yankees, in particular, are the team that went out and got him because it wouldn't shock me if they can help him learn. They love like their two seams and their sinkers, and I wonder if they're going to be able to get him to throw a better one or to throw one, and then perhaps that makes him more more feasible as an actual MLB reliever. Um, but in terms of what the Brewers got in Quezada, so it's interesting to me because they already had signed four of nine Nicaraguan players in the 2023 international class of the nine that signed in all of baseball. So now they have five of the nine that signed in that class because Quezada was one of the ones that signed with another team. I've talked about it before, but the Brewers, especially in the international class and stuff, they really seem to like to go after markets that they think are underscouted or undervalued. And Nicaragua in particular has been a big one for them. I think this year they signed about half of the players that were from there. 2 years ago, I know they signed at least half of the players that were from there. So they really go into that market. And my guess is they wanted Quezada back in last year's international class and they liked him. So when they had a chance to get him, they're like, yeah, let's do it. I was able to find a tiny little bit of information and video on him. Um, when he signed, he had been up to 92 as at the time probably a 17 or 18-year-old. So I saw some video of him in the DSL last year. His fastball has some pretty nice arm side run and sink. So it looks like it's probably a two-seamer and probably one that he'd want to use more low in the zone. He also has a slider, which is kind of, I saw one scouting report on it that described it as stupendous, which is a fun way to describe anything, a stupendous slider. Um, it looked really good on the video. It was late breaking. It kind of seemed like at times it was slurvy, like it might have two different shapes, but I think when it's on, it looks like it could be a really good pitch. And then he was also mixing in a changeup that looked pretty decent and got some swing and miss against lefties. So I think he's a three-pitch guy who could last as a starter. I think we probably see him in, I would guess, the Arizona Complex League this year, but given he is a little bit older for someone pitching in the Dominican League, say he has a good spring or something, wouldn't shock me to see him make it to Carolina this year. But yeah, I think it's a pretty intriguing pickup for somebody who was DFA'd and for somebody that the Brewers had clearly decided they couldn't get enough out of Andrews to make him a legitimate MLB reliever. So now they get kind of a lottery ticket. Doesn't mean anything's gonna or everything's gonna work with him. It's highly unlikely it will, but at the very least, it's an intriguing pickup. So I like that pick. I like that trade for the Brewers. And then the other trade that we kind of hinted at earlier was former first round pick Ethan Small traded to the Giants. The Brewers just received cash back in that deal. I guess, and Gunnar, you might have some opinions on this, but kind of what went wrong with Small, and is that do you look back at that and say that was a complete waste of a pick for the Brewers, or is it more of the MLB draft is a huge crapshoot and it's really hard to hit on all of these picks?
It's that, but also up until that point, the Brewers did have a pretty bad stretch of first round picks where we weren't really hitting in a lot of those. I think of guys like Corey Ray or something like that, where it seems like it's a very safe pick almost at the time. And that's kind of what Small felt like is like a safe guy. I think he had what 3 or 4 years in college, or he was an older guy, coming off of a nice college baseball playoff run. I think he was too. So it just felt like, oh, this guy's going to be ready pretty soon here. Like he's ready to go. Ironically, he didn't come up for quite a while. Even when he did come up, he got a cup of coffee when he was up here. But yeah, I think it is hard to hate on a lot of these picks. I mean, the draft is how many players, but I think we did kind of that was the tail end of our kind of bad run with starter or first round picks at that point. So it's just hard to hit, I guess, like you said, but we kind of have now strayed away from the safer pick and we kind of now have flipped our whole sort of draft model, maybe if that's the best way to put it, on guys that we draft. Like tools maybe isn't the right word to go about it, but we've definitely identified guys that if you have this type of mold that we want, we're going for you instead of just like maybe need at that point. What year was Ethan Small? Was that like 2017 or
19, 2019.
19? Okay, yeah. So I guess it wasn't really even need at that point, but yeah, I just feel like that was a very safe pick. And ever since then, I guess we've drafted pretty well, so I'm not really concerned, but it did feel like that one was a waste to me. But how did you feel about it? Because I know when that first happened on me, I think I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm pretty sure you told me that was a bad pick when we first did it. Or at least you weren't that excited about it. So
Yeah, he was a guy that I enjoyed watching in college because he pitched with a ton of emotion and he did have a great run through the College World Series. He I just I worry about low velo guys translating, and that doesn't mean you can't pick them, but like 4-year college guys like he was, like you were saying, who have low velo likely aren't adding much in general. His fastball has good characteristics, and the changeup's a good pitch. It's a legitimately good pitch. It is right now. It always has been. The goal and what they were banking on the entire time was him learning a breaking ball, and he just has not. He throws a slider now. It's not good. I'm curious how the Giants plan to use him, but right now I'm not going to rule out the fact that he could figure things out. And you know, fastball changeup are both good pitches. Like you could see it working out if he can find any semblance of a breaking ball. But in terms of the pick at the time, I did think I will say this, I should say. it was an underslot pick. They drafted him earlier than most people thought to sign him for less than what people expected him to get, or less than what their slot value was, I should say, at that pick. And then they used it to try and sign like a guy like Antoine Kelly in their second round. And they traded Kelly for Matt Bush. He was part of that trade, but Kelly is looking like he's probably going to be an MLB reliever this year. He had a really good year for the Rangers last year. It's always hard in my mind. It's very hard to judge an MLB draft just based on that type of pick because it is a money saving pick. Like that was the goal behind making the pick. Unfortunately, that whole draft looks bad. It was a really bad draft. The only other major leaguer so far is David Hamilton, who was part of the Hunter Renfroe trade. He he made it for, let's see, 15 games, 33 at bats last year, had an OPS of 438. He stole like 80 bases in the minors last year. He can fly. Um, but that's the only other guy. And Kelly's probably going to make it this year, like I said. But if you look up and down this list, it's not good. Um, Darian Miller is still in the Brewers organization as a catcher. I'm looking at the list right now, the ninth round pick out of high school. He's interesting, but he'd be like a borderline top 50 guy in the entire organization for me. And Cam Devaney, we traded. He was the 15th round pick. We traded him for Taylor Clark this offseason. But everybody else, well, I guess a 32nd round pick, Jefferson Figueroa is still yeah, he's still in the organization, and so is the 37th round pick, who they did use a little of the extra money they saved to sign those guys. So who knows? Maybe those work out. But it was a bad draft, and Small just kind of headlines that is kind of the last year of what you would have to consider bad drafts right now. It looks like they really have taken a really, really big step forward in that regard, starting with that COVID draft when they got Mitchell and Weimer. But it was a bad draft, and I guess you could say it was a wasted pick. I just have a really hard time saying that for guys who make it to MLB. Like, it's so hard for that to happen, and there's so many first round picks from that class who did not make it and probably won't make it to MLB. It wasn't a good pick, but for me, it's like, I get it. I get why they made it. They were trying to do other things in the draft, and they thought he'd make it at one point, and he did. He just didn't work out like they were hoping.
Yeah. And I think, well, two things here for me. One, hindsight's always fun to look at because you can kind of look at guys right behind him and it's like, we could get Matt Bush or Michael Bush and the Cubs. Like, that would have been a nice pick. At least it's more of a flyer. I think Anthony Volpe isn't like he a top prospect or with the Yankees right now. Or I don't know if
Anthony
he worked
Volpe.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the number one prospect in baseball a couple.
Yeah. Because I remember him as a big name. So, I
Yeah.
mean, and those are two guys, like you mentioned. It's not like a lot of these players like everyone was hitting. Those are two names, and a complete different vibe of a pick versus what we got. My other thing though, I had two things was we're gonna have to have you break down the whole slot stuff once we get closer to the MLB draft because that is a whole like other section of the draft that I don't understand. Being completely honest, like I get it on paper, but that explains a lot of why we do some stuff versus like why this guy got picked over that guy got picked. It's just kind of like a long game of way to look at the MLB draft versus just that player was better than this player. Why didn't we pick him? So we'll have to have you break that down for everybody once it gets closer to the
Oh
draft.
yeah.
Um,
We'll do a full like draft preview when we get
yeah,
I'm gonna love that. That's gonna be my thing. So, um, but yeah, no, I mean that is what's so hard about looking back at MLB drafts is that it's a completely different ball game than the NBA draft. You passed up on a guy, you didn't get him. That was because you chose the other person over him. There was no other outside reason for it happening. Same with the NFL draft. It's very different in MLB. It's a lot different. So I am looking at this now in the slot value of the guys. Um, Dre Jameson got less money than Ethan Small for the Diamondbacks. He's pretty interesting. He's got a good arm. Matt Wallner's been a pretty interesting hitter who I think he's probably going to be a really good hitter for the Twins. He got the exact same slot value or slot money as Small. So those are probably the two you could look at and say, if I could go back, I'd probably want to redo it and do it that way. Now, if you take again like the whole draft into account, the whole draft wasn't good. So you could argue they should have done something completely different anyway. But like you said, hindsight's really, really easy to look back on these things. there's just not that much value in the draft overall most years. But like, let's look. The number 4 pick in that draft has a negative WAR for his career. Number 10 still hasn't debuted. 13 hasn't debuted. 15 hasn't debuted. 17 and 18 have negative WAR. 21 have negative. 22, 24, 25, 26, 27 all haven't debuted. Like, a lot of players don't even make it, or they're just not even somewhat successful at the major league level. God, number 12 pick has negative WAR. Like, there's there's a lot of risk in the draft, and I love the draft, and I think the Brewers are legitimately getting a lot of value out of the draft recently, but it's a crapshoot. Even at like the number 1 pick, if you look through history, there's plenty of people who didn't work out. Mickey Moniak had a pretty solid year for the Angels last year, but we're well removed from him being the number 1 pick, and he was basically given up on by the Phillies. So there's always risk. It's very hard to judge teams too much on it, but like you said, for a long stretch there, if you're not hitting on anybody like the Brewers weren't, other than like 4th round Corbin Burns, 10th round Brandon Woodruff, like if you're not hitting on anybody, then it's an issue. Then you got to kind of reevaluate who's running your draft and how you're running your draft. I guess the other transactional news that we should probably talk about here is the Gary Sanchez. I guess it's not even transactional news. It's non-transactional news because it hasn't been announced yet. Robert Murray kind of said he reached out to his sources and he hasn't heard back, and nobody will tell him anything, which is, he said it's really weird. He said he's really never had this where they won't at least be like, yeah, it's a physical thing. We don't know what's going on. Like, they usually will tell him something, and nobody from either side will tell him anything. So we had heard that Gary Sanchez was going to be a Brewer for about 1 year, 7 million. But right now it's kind of looking up in the air. So Gunnar, what could be some of the reasons maybe for a deal not being fully completed at this point? And I guess looking forward, do you expect it to get worked out and for him to be a Brewer?
Well, looking at reasons why maybe it's not working out right now, I know he had his fractured wrist back in September. That's the obvious thing you can point to and say, oh, there's definitely something on the physical here that's holding them up. They obviously knew about an injury, but I guess once you hit the physical, it could be a whole different ball game. I mean, that was in September he got it done. So I mean, you're probably assuming it's going to be nice and healed at this point. He shows up at the physical, maybe it's just not in the best place that it could be. I imagine. I don't know what wrist it was on too, but as a catcher, I
Right.
can't imagine. Right, okay, so it's more of a hitting thing, I guess. But either even so, I mean, catching you gotta throw it with that hand too. But I expect it to get done too. I just assume it's gonna be somehow like a reworked thing or like contract wise, 7 million is not a ton of money, but unless somebody comes and was who was like 6 million and they were like waiting there and they're like, we don't care, we'll take a chance on Gary Sanchez. I guess maybe he can kind of back out at that point. Um, but I assumed he kind of liked our situation and this is also me being hopeful because our next part here is going to talk about our other options. And we already talked about how we don't necessarily love those guys. So I would take a chance on Gary too. I don't think, like I said, 7 million is a ton of money, but I guess, yeah, I mean, do you expect it to still get done at this point or, because I assume we had the same reason as to why it's not getting done right now.
Yeah, I would imagine it's physical, and I would imagine the wrist is, if it's not the wrist, that means something else popped up probably that would be a concern to the Brewers, and you never know what that could be. I think it's going to get done. My guess is right now the Brewers are trying to make it a more incentive-laden contract where, okay, if you play this many games, you'll get an extra 500,000, whatever. Instead of being fully guaranteed 7 million, they might be trying to make it 4 to 5 million guaranteed, where the rest can be earned by hitting certain plate appearance numbers or games or time spent on the roster. Like, you can do it that way too, like service time days. Um, I would imagine that's kind of the way they're going right now, is just trying to figure out a way to keep the deal probably not even probably pretty much unchanged, but just less guaranteed money. Teams do this a lot. I think sometimes we don't hear about it. You always wonder how early, like, the news comes out that they might be signing in comparison to where they actually are in the process, especially for someone who, I think back to like K-Rod. Remember every year the Brewers would sign him because they did it like 4 times. He would always have trouble getting back into the US for visa reasons and stuff.
Hmm.
I always wonder with like some of the foreign born players if stuff like that could be going on and changing the timeline and doing stuff like that. Um, it's all pretty it's all pretty interesting. I guess I shouldn't say I expect it to get done. I would lean more towards it still getting done than it not getting done. Um, but I don't know what the reason is. And there could be a huge issue that they're concerned about in the physical, and then maybe you don't see it happen still. But like you kind of touched on, 7 million is not it's not enough for me to blow up a deal over a guy I think is going to help pretty significantly over our other options. So we can go into that now. If the deal does end up getting kind of lost and we don't end up bringing in Gary Sanchez, you think we're just going back to Nola and Haas as our two options, or you think we might look elsewhere still? Personally, I'm not sure there are many, many other free agent options out there, but what do you think?
That's it. I think we're kind of just back to square one at that point, unfortunately. And we broke it all down with those two guys. We don't necessarily love those options. I think has a higher maybe ceiling, but definitely riskier. And then Nola, I guess, is the safer option. But maybe a trade with somebody that we're not even thinking of on our radar if it becomes like that. I think of guys like Victor Caratini. I think we traded that was during the year, but early on in the year. We didn't necessarily,
It's like 2 days before opening day.
yeah.
But yeah.
So, I mean, there could be somebody that pops up as an emergency that we've had in our list for a while, and maybe we had somebody in our list even before Gary Sanchez, and we obviously had Gary Sanchez above him, so then we try to get him, and who knows, we may have a backup plan in the works, but I would obviously want Gary Sanchez, unfortunately. But you had a good point too, though. It's just like we don't know the reason, so we could literally be in the clear right now. It's just working through other stuff that we don't even know about, because we're just kind of guessing on the reason as to why. Maybe it is a physical, his wrist injury, but that's not even reported on. That's just us guessing. So hopefully it works out. But could you live with Haas or Nola being our backup catcher, or are you kind of hoping for a Victor Caratini situation?
I mean, I was prepared to live with it, but I wasn't going to love it going into the season. I would prefer they go out and bring in somebody a little bit more recently proven, I guess you could say. But honestly, Caratini was coming off a terrible year for the Padres when we brought him in. So it's not like it was that much of a different situation, honestly, to what Haas and Nola are, which are guys a year or two removed from being decent backups. I think at that point, though, that probably means Cairo ends up being up earlier. I think that was kind of the change that this Sanchez trade or signing was going to bring. I don't think Nola or Haas is going to work out, so I think that just kind of expedites the process for Cairo, and you might see him earlier in the season than you were going to. If we do have Sanchez and everyone stays healthy, I could see Cairo not coming up in 2024. I think that's a lot different than where we would be before that. I think I think they would probably just stick with Nola and Haas at that point. Like I said, I don't really know if there's any interesting options on the board outside of Sanchez. I think a trade could be tough. Teams always want to hold, like the Padres just happen to have, honestly, Austin Nola is a big reason we got Caratini, uh, because they happen to have Nola and then they had some other backup options that they like. So they were just in a three-man rut where they weren't going to be able to keep all of them. So it's hard to find a backup catcher late in the season because why wouldn't the team that has them want to keep them? So yeah, I'm really hoping they can find a way to make this Sanchez thing work. And obviously, I'm hoping that he will be good to go then. I mean, you never know what's going on right now. It could be a case where they think he's going to miss half the season or something, and that's why they don't want to keep going with this deal because they don't want to miss it. They don't only want 80 games out of him. They're not paying him 7 million for 80 games. So we'll see how it goes. I would think we're going to have an answer somewhat soon. I can't imagine he wants this dragging on too much longer. Either way, whether he's going to be back on the market or getting in and trying to work with pitchers, I would think a catcher would want to get this figured out as soon as possible. So hopefully we have an answer pretty soon.
Hmm.
All right. And then, okay, so we've got, I mean, that's kind of the real transactional news we've gotten so far since spring training started. But we have been getting kind of tidbits and information from spring over the last few days. Before we go too far into that, I do want to touch on this, and this is not the fault of the people who are working the Brewers beat. I feel like we're missing out on a lot of information compared to other teams.
I was going to say that honestly, it doesn't seem like we have like a ton of reporting, at least a
No,
wide scope of it. It just comes from a couple of sources.
yeah, and I feel bad because like Adam McCalvy, I don't know if you saw Gunner, but he had lost vision in his left eye at one point in this offseason and had to get a surgery to like reattach his retina. So he won't be able to make it down to spring, which is 100% understandable. Completely get it. Like I'm just glad he's he's apparently going to be okay. But right now it's basically Todd Rosiak down there for the Journal Sentinel, and that's it. Like that's the only person we're getting any information out of. Um, Brewers social team's doing a pretty decent job of giving us at least a little video, some interesting looks at stuff, but Rosiak's like the only person giving us real information right now. And I know we'll have um, Brewer Fanatic is sending down a couple people. We're going to have at some point, well, Kurt Hoag's gonna kind of switch out with Todd Rosiak at one point, um, which will probably give me a better. Todd does a good job. I enjoy Todd, but Kurt's going to give me more minor league stuff, so I'm going to enjoy that. Um, but yeah, it just sucks. Like, there's no athletic writer for the Brewers. I found out today that the Twins have two athletic writers. Like, why do they need two? Why would the Brewers not have one and they have two? Um, there's just kind of a lack of credentialed people who are in spring training. Um, so I'm really hoping we start getting some more information. It does suck when you kind of scroll through Twitter and you see all these little tidbits from Tigers reporters, Twins reporters, um, just every team. And obviously the Brewers are a smaller market, but it's been kind of annoying not getting any information. Um, like I said, Todd is doing a good job and he's getting good interviews and giving us a decent amount that he can give us, but it just feels like there's a real lack of information compared to what I see from other teams. So I did want to start with that. So yeah, now that I know I ranted a little bit about the coverage there, but based on what we have heard, Gunner, has anything or anybody in particular kind of caught your eye based on maybe what we were expecting, maybe versus what we've already seen and what we might have learned already, I guess, through the first 4 or 5 days of spring here?
hmm Well, first, I think we got to go and attack our face of the franchise, Christian Yelich. You sent the photo to me a couple times. I've seen it on Twitter. He's looking a little more beefier this spring. Hopefully that means organic beefier, and he's been in the weight room. He didn't take after other face of the franchise that I love, but yeah, we're obviously looking for him to tap into some more power. He hasn't had a problem hitting the ball hard, so I don't know if that's necessarily the reason for it. It's just more mechanics wise, which I'll break down here with the swing, but it's nice to see him in a little bit different shape, a little bit different look, and maybe we can somehow tap into that power a little bit more. Because like I say, he's right at the top of the league. So if he can somehow hit the ball harder, sure, I'll take it. Um, but first, I know we got a couple of videos of his swing, which if people don't know, I kind of obsess over swings. I should probably break down, I guess, why I do that. In college baseball, I did suck at hitting at one point. At least I felt like I sucked at hitting. And I'm just like, what am I doing wrong? Like I just need to dumb down hitting for myself. Like I need to go back to square one. So that's just kind of what I did. I kind of broke down all the mechanics of it, what makes hitting simple to do the most effective stuff. I just kind of look at like simple loads, how to get your bat path on plane, um, just allowing yourself to have the most failure, but also the most success to hit a baseball and doing the most with less, I guess is the best way to put it. So with Christian, I think what we've noticed over the years is like 18, 19, and even parts of 20 when he was struggling, I actually thought his swing was okay. Um, he was tapping into some pretty good power too in 2020, which I think people kind of forget about. He had a nice month or so. I think he hit like 10 or I don't even know how many home runs he hit, but he had a good stretch. He just wasn't having a good average. But I think he was doing a lot of the right stuff in that season. All the things that I mentioned, getting his bat on plane, it was very simple, relaxed. Once I think he started thinking more about that 2020 season, it felt like he maybe was worried about that batting average. At least it's kind of how I took it. And he kind of felt like, how can I just get my bat to the ball fast and allow myself to hit the ball more, not striking out, not just kind of trying to hit home runs all the time. How can I just hit the ball and do? I hit the ball hard, so maybe if I get more contact, I'll do that. It's felt like maybe he was shaking. I felt like he maybe was shaking the bat a little bit too much in his load. Kind of how I describe it too is if you had like a string at the top of your tip of the bat, what would that look like? Or if you had think of like a golf, like the monitor when you hit a golf ball, like on the PGA Tour, like when they track the ball, how would you track like the tip of the bat? I think his the last couple of years, it's gone from like almost a vertical to just eliminating the whole like failure part of it. He just kind of goes straight to top of the bat to ball. which kind of cuts a lot of that failure aspect out of it. You're not really getting the bat on plane, which allows you to fail more. And doesn't allow for a lot of that. When I say that, it's like if you were early on a ball, you could hit it still out front. If you're late on a ball, you're still going to hit it pretty hard in the back of your swing.
I was gonna
So,
say it's more of like a room for error type of.
right,
It's
that's
more
what I
like
was
a
looking for.
timing room for error more than anything else.
Right. So just basically what I'm looking for with him is just how can we get that bat on plane faster, and how can he get more simple with it? Because like I said, he hits the ball hard, so that's not the problem. It's just how can he do that, hit the ball in the air, and do it the most. We saw him go to a toe tap too. I think I want to notice or say, I think that was 2021, 2022. If it was 2021, it was the end of 2021, 2022, yeah. Um, and I don't really care about toe taps, leg lifts, whatever. I preferred him having a leg lift, but if toe tap gets him in that position faster, go for it. I don't really care. And that's a timing thing for him too. So if he can do that, get his bat on plane, hit it, that's fine with me. Whatever gets you to hit the ball in the air and hit it more, because like I said, you hit the ball hard, so we just need to hit it hard in the air more. And it seems like he's been able to do that. Like I said, we got a couple videos from him from spring. He's looking beefy. It looks like it's a nice simple swing now. He had the toe tap. It's on plane. Um, a lot of good things that I'm seeing so far from him. It's just you hope that baseball's a lot of mental game, obviously, too. So let's say he has a slow start doing the right stuff. You just hope he doesn't kind of fall back into that old kind of thinking of just like, I just got to shut my brain down and hit the ball. Just kind of trust the process, I guess I would hope with Christian. And I think if he does all those things for a long period of time, he will be in a good spot. So,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's funny to look back at last year because it was obviously super up and down. Like he had a not great start. He was fantastic from May through July, like just mashing the ball. It looked more like 2018 Yelich. And then he had a bad end to the season. Well, I shouldn't say that. He had a bad August, and then he goes down with his back problem, right? And we had been saying for a while in texts and even on Twitter for me, like, I don't think he's right now. And that killed his numbers. It really did. He came back for the last week of the season and he actually mashed. He had a really, really good last week, and he did really well in the two playoff games he played in. Um, his final numbers are it's an 818 OPS with a 120, that's a 124 OPS plus. It's basically the guy we traded for from the Marlins, is what he was last year. He was like a 19 to 20 homer guy those last couple years in Miami. That's what he hit last year, was 19. Um, Strikeouts were basically in line with what they used to be. Walks were, I mean, you could take 2017 Yelich and 2023 Yelich. They're almost the exact same player. Um, but like you said, he's capable of being 2018, at least 2018 Yelich. I don't think we're ever seeing 2019 Yelich again. That was unreal. He was on pace for 50 plus homers that year before the knee. Like, I don't think we're seeing 50. Um, I could see mid 30s and homers for Yelich if he can get back to just, like you said, giving himself a little bit more room for error. It felt better last year, but even then it was kind of in spurts. And like we saw, it kind of came and went with the season. You could see the numbers. It was when he was a little bit more relaxed, things seemed to go a lot better than when he was. Do you think like the bat waggle type thing that you're talking about, like the too much movement is when he like tenses up? Because to me, that's
I feel
always
like
seemed
that,
like it
yeah.
was.
And some guys, you could probably even break down 2018. He was probably doing it, but
Oh yeah.
he was such in a good mental space where I think he could actually get it in the right place still. Like he could actually work around it. And he doesn't even know that he's doing it mentally. He's just like, okay, I can do this, and then I'm gonna put my bat in the right spot. Now it seems like he's doing it, but in like you're talking about a tensed way, to where it's like I'm freezing up, and then I'm just trying to touch the ball at that point. And I should also say that I look for a lot more other stuff in swings, but with Christian, these are like the two things that we looked at was one, his toe tap change, and obviously this bat path problem. There's other stuff that I look at or um, either for myself or other players that makes a good swing, but he does all the other good stuff right because he hits the ball hard. There's a reason for that because he does everything else right. It's just how can we create that room for error? But I think it's a good point, though. I think he definitely tenses up is probably the best way to put it, at least recently.
Yeah. I mean, he's talked about how much of a mental hurdle he's had the last few years with how he just felt like he had to be that guy still. And when you're trying to be that guy and you're struggling, it just makes it even harder to be that guy. he finally talked about right before he went on this hot streak, which started with like that Royals series, right? When he started all of a sudden just crushing homers for a few games. He talked about on the Mookie Betts podcast about how he was trying something new. He was finally saying, "All right, I don't move like I did in 2018-19. I got to try something else." And all of a sudden it just exploded again. And I think if you took out April, you can't do this obviously, but if you took out April and August, I bet you that OPS is climbing pretty close to 900 for the season. And you obviously, again, you can't do that. That's not how baseball works. It's all part of it. But I do think last year we saw the signs of a potential like return to what we, not quite MVP level, but all-star maybe. And the fact that you are seeing this video now and saying, okay, that looks more like where I think he needs to be with the swing, that definitely makes me feel good. Um, as everyone who knows me at all or has listened to this, I want Christian to succeed so badly, it's unhealthy. Probably more than he wants himself to succeed. So, not really. I'm sure he wants it more than I do. But um, like my favorite player before he was a Brewer turns into an MVP here, and now I watch him get hated on for 30 years because he's not the same guy. Like I haven't enjoyed it. I like last year he finally started getting some love back. I would love to see just a legit all-star season this year, and I think he's capable of it. I really do. Um, all right. Now that I have talked about Yelich as much as you did, let's move. I'm going to move on to something that I noticed, and this was a real quick glimpse, and it's hard to tell for sure, but I watched all of Aaron Ashby's rehab appearances last year. The guy looked physically uncomfortable on the mound when I watched him. It did not look right watching. I couldn't exactly pinpoint it, but it looked like the arm path was wrong and that he was like dropping it to a different point, and it just nothing looked comfortable. I saw like 3 or 4 pitches of him pitching, probably Thursday or Friday. It looked so much more like what I was used to seeing from him. It gave me a ton of hope that he might just be back to being more comfortable. We have no idea what Velo's at, no idea how the stuff is working. But the fact that he looked normal, like I didn't know what Velo was until I heard about it later in these minor league rehab starts. But I thought he looked really off, and then it came out that he was throwing like 88 to 89, and we've seen him up to 99. Um, so the fact that he looks more comfortable makes me think that the velo probably is at least bumping back up to hopefully into the mid 90s. If the Brewers can get a legit starter out of Ashby this year, that could completely change the outlook on that rotation. I mean, he's got as good of stuff as any left-handed starter in baseball. It's just a matter of command, health, and really just consistency. But he hasn't had that many opportunities to be consistent. That takes time. So I was really excited to see him looking more like how I expected. And I've gotten my hopes up a little bit that he actually could be a starter. And that's completely irrational based on 4 pitches I saw on Twitter video. But just a quick look at it, it just looks normal now instead of last year where I thought he looked like he was in pain almost throwing the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, he changes a lot for our rotation. Um, I think people, even I forget how highly valued he was in our rotation. And you talked about his talent. Like we gave him a big contract or big quote unquote, but we committed to him because of a reason, because he looked like he was going to be one of those Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, maybe not that good, but in that talent wise, you got to think about what we valued them back then at that point in their careers. I think they kind of felt like he was in that sort of mold of we can maybe turn this guy into something like that. I guess I have a question for you. It's the velo obviously was super concerning last year. Is a part of that obviously one injury, but two, just taking that much time off? It's got to be hard to ramp up and get back to throwing that hard too. So maybe the velo might be a little bit more down this spring, but with now time he's been throwing since when he was in AAA last year. So hopefully maybe that velo is back up now since he's been throwing more. Do you think that could be a reason as to why too we saw that in the summer of him being that low?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, they took a long time before they actually sent him out on rehab, which to me was a sign that they were feeling like he was getting. There were rumors that they thought he might be able to pitch for them at the end of the year last year, like midsummer. I think they were surprised by what they saw when they got him into those rehab starts, and that's kind of why they shut it down earlier than expected. And like I said, I think it was more a case of him just not being right than it was the buildup. Um, but I do think, yeah, that you probably could expect it to be at least a little lower in spring. Honestly, it normally is for especially guys who aren't trying to make the roster. Like Jacob Mizorowski is going to go out and he's going to throw 100 in his games because he's trying to make a point. Guys who have made the roster and are on the roster, you're probably not seeing their best velo in spring because they're working on other things. They're more focused on other stuff. So you never know what you might see from Ashby, but I'm hoping we can at least see 92 to 94, something in that range when he's pitching out there. That's a pretty good sign to me that he can be up into those mid 90s. Um, yeah, like I said, I think it was more. I think it was legitimately that he just was not right when he was throwing in these rehab games, and that's why they like I said, at one point they had kind of said, "Yeah, we might see him this year," and then it was in late August. It was like, "Nope, he's just going to finish the year with some rehab starts, and then we'll move on to next year." So I don't think it went exactly how they hoped. Hopefully, it did over the offseason. It sounds like he did. The fact that he's throwing pens on like day two is a really, really good sign. That they're not really worried about anything at the moment.
Hmm. And it's just a lot of health too. I think if he's in a healthy spot, he's been throwing for a while. We should at the very least see an uptick in that velo. And if I don't see it now, I guess is my point, then I would be concerned because you've had this whole time of being able to throw.
Hmm.
You're seemingly healthy, like you said. They even thought he was healthy last year. Now you've had a lot of time to throw. You're healthy. Okay, now what's up? Because now it's really concerning. So I'll slide to the next guy, our second best hitter, I guess, in the team now, or arguably Willie Adames, I guess, could be up there as well. But Rhys Hoskins, our newly acquired Brewer, we're all very excited about him. The tidbits that we've gotten from him, we've gotten a couple swings, videos, at least highlights, clips, and then he's had a couple good interviews that we've gotten so far. First, I think with that knee and that we knew about the injury and with that video that we've been getting, I think that's something I'm going to be watching is we talked about we being the Brewers, we talked about his injury and how they're going to take it slow throughout spring. Don't know how much we're going to see of him, I guess, throughout spring. We're probably going to get this stuff like this, batting practices, him fielding balls at first base. I don't know if we're going to get a ton of games, at least not the first couple weeks of spring, I would assume, just trying to get his feet back under him. So it's going to be a lot of us breaking down his swing. Hopefully, he's in a good spot. It's a lower half injury too, which I think is gives me more hope. I guess it's you need your lower half. Obviously, it's his left knee. I'm pretty sure. So it's okay. I'm not that concerned about it, I guess is my point. I'm not going to be worried that that's going to hold him up. It's just going to be, can he get healthy enough to be in playing first base? Because I think that's a tough thing too, with a knee injury or any type of injury like that. It's he can DH, then I guess fine. I'm not going to be worried about that. But can he play first base? Because that'll change a lot for us. Um, the other thing with the interviews, we got a couple of good ones. He talked about how he viewed the Brewers being in the other dugout with the Phillies, and they said they just kind of felt like we were always a good team, we were a gritty team, just kind of respected us as a group. And he said underrated is probably not the right word. I think that's kind of how he phrased it, but just being a smaller market and maybe teams always looking past you just because we're the Brewers, Milwaukee Brewers. They just always respected us because we were always good for some reason. He said we always had young guys coming up and producing, that being probably more pitchers, I would assume he's talking about. Obviously, we always had a good young pitchers coming up, and we've had some good young hitters, obviously, too. One we'll talk about later, I guess. We had a nice little guy for a year and a half there, but just it was nice to feel like we obviously know we're good, but it's always funny to hear like other teams' perspectives and people respect us. And he picked us for a reason, so it's not really that obvious or not obvious. He obviously wanted to come here for a reason because we were good. But the other interview that was probably got the most hype on Twitter was talking about the Corbin Burnes trade. For people who didn't listen to our last episode or didn't hear Corbin Burnes' comments when he first got traded, he talked about how maybe our plan didn't align with what we told Reese because we told him that maybe we would keep Corbin Burnes and have this whole different type of plan to where we're going to go for it type of idea, which we would argue we're still doing that. But Corbin felt like maybe he alluded to the fact that we could be potentially lying to him in a way to get him to sign with us, which Reese seemed like he shut down pretty quickly there in his interview. He said, look, he's bummed to lose Corbin Burnes. Obviously, he's a Cy Young Award pitcher. Even if he's not a quote Cy Young Award pitcher right now, he's still a very good pitcher, notable pitcher. People know about him around the league, all-star, all that. So that sucks, but he was totally aware of what was going on. He said that the team was very upfront with him and talked about what was going on with him. Like that was a possibility. That's why he's bummed because look, it's a possibility. I know that's an option that could happen, but I'm sure he wasn't hoping it would happen or anything like that. But he knew it was a possibility, and he also knows that we could still win with this group as he's seen. And that's what he's talked about is no matter who we've got on the roster, we always seem to win. So he's very confident in this group. I'm very confident in this group. I know you are too. So Corbin, you are maybe a liar in my eyes, but uh, did you feel anything about I know those interviews probably got a lot of people talking and maybe had some thoughts for out of you.
Yeah, I thought for the first one, I think most players kind of say that when they come to the Brewers. It's that we weren't exactly sure how they won as many games as they did, but they won a lot of games and they always competed really hard and had good pitching and did just kind of bring in, yeah, I think back to that Phillies series last year and like Andrew Monasterio had a huge series against them. So in Reese's mind, he's probably thinking
Yeah,
that's another young guy they brought up that just did really
this guy's
well.
incredible.
Um, but I think for the Corbin one, yeah, it to me, I blame Scott Boras probably a little bit more than Corbin because I think he led Corbin into believing that the Brewers were kind of not totally truthful with Reese. But like you said, he said, I was surprised, yes. He's like, but I also knew it was on the table and a possibility. And then he said something that I feel like Brewer fans need to embrace a little bit. It's really hard to argue with the results. This team does this stuff and it keeps working. Like, I don't get why, as a fan base, we can't understand. I don't want to say understand, but accept that while these moves might not be your favorite thing in the world, they're not always my favorite thing in the world. They work, and there's a reason they do it this way, and it keeps them competitive, keeps them doing all this stuff. And reset it very well there. Like it's very hard to argue with the results of these types of moves and what the Brewers do. And he said, I know they do this stuff. He was like, this is the reality of their market. Um, I don't know if that's a quote unquote exactly what he said, but he said something along those lines. Like this is what they're not. I think he said they're not the biggest market. They're obviously not the biggest market in MLB, but this is the reality of how they operate. And so, yes, it surprised him, but no, he wasn't completely caught off guard. It wasn't a situation where he was like, "Oh my God, why did I sign here? They traded Corbin Burns. I thought we were trying to win." Like, no, I think Scott Boras is a good manipulator in the media. Corbin Burns is a good manipulator in the media. I think there'd be no reason for Reese to not say something along the lines of, "Yeah, I kind of thought he was going to be here, but he's not, so we'll get through it or whatever." But he very openly said, "I knew it was a possibility." So I don't think there's any truth to whatever Corbin was trying to put out there. Kind of one of his parting shots that I knew we were going to get. But
I will say though, it does suck to hear that maybe the perception is like, oh, this is how they handled their players. I don't think he meant it in a negative way because I we obviously can see him talking in the way that he's talking didn't seem negative, but it does. I can feel like if that's kind of like, oh, the Brewers just always trade their good players, like if that's like the perception, we know there's a reason for that. But I can see as a player hearing that if I'm not from Milwaukee, if I'm not a Brewers fan and you're like, oh, I'm good. Oh, let's say I got drafted to the Brewers this June. And it's like, oh, well, I'm going to be here for 6 years in the Brewers uniform. I guess they're going to trade me if I'm good. I can see how that kind of sucks, or at least that perception sucks. We know that's baseball. That's how life works, whatever. But I can see that. I guess it makes sense sometimes as like a fan or just even like being a front office guy. There's 100 reasons why to do that, why it's smart. Like I said, I would do that. I know you would do that too, as at least being a Milwaukee Brewers franchise, I would do that. So it just sucks knowing that maybe the players blindly think that about our franchise. Like we just, well, if you're good enough, we'll just trade you for guys and maybe revamp it a little bit, even though we can go over all the reasons again. We're not going to, but we know it makes sense. It just kind of sucks the perception, I guess, sometimes.
yeah, I would hope that they would at least look into that slightly because, like we went over last time, Burns and Hader are like the two examples of that actually being the
hmm
truth. Like that's like the only
That's what
people.
I mean. It's just like two guys, and that's like our perception.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It does suck. That's a good point. Like I didn't really think about it that way, but if players see it through that lens, it could absolutely affect how they look at the team. I think everyone who's been in the organization, other than maybe those two who went out and got paid, like Hader got an insane contract and Burns is definitely going to as well. I guess if I were looking at it from most perspectives, like other than maybe the Yankees, Dodgers, those types of teams, that's got to be the case for almost every team. If you can take a few examples for almost every team where they're like, we can't pay that guy, we're going to trade him, or they, or I guess they let him run out, and they a lot of teams do that, but then they're the ones who lose out on that value. So, um, I mean, obviously it didn't dissuade, like you said, Reese may not even, or I'm sure he didn't mean it in a negative way. He signed with the Brewers. He still signed after all that.
Hmm.
Um, but it is interesting to think about it that way. Yeah, so for my next one mine's going to be pitching and catching mostly, I think, but um, Jacob Mizorowski down there looking like, I mean, he's just chucking gas. I watched one video of from Rosiak actually of him throwing a pen, and you could just kind of see guys in the background looking at the iPads that probably had the Rapsodo data and stuff, and they're just kind of like looking down, like, oh my God, like they were trying not to show emotion, but you could see them kind of going, whoa. Um, because it's just, I mean, it is insane stuff. It's Jacob DeGrom type stuff. Like that's the type of three pitch mix Mizorowski has is on that level. Um, he's gonna have to throw way more strikes. He's gonna have to do all that stuff. He did get interviewed as well. That dude, if you didn't know he was 6'7", you could tell me he was 12, and I would believe it based on two things. One, his face, and he just has a baby face. And two, he is not the most well-spoken person in the world. I'm not insinuating anything here, but I think I remember I remember one interview he did for the Timber Rattlers last year where they asked him to name or to read off Wisconsin cities, and that's a struggle for anybody from that's not from Wisconsin. Like I have seen plenty of people not be able to read them, but this man was having a real hard time even sounding out something that sounded somewhat reasonable. um, I'll say it this way: I think it's probably a good thing he's a very good pitcher because I'm not sure what else he'd be doing at the moment, but um, he definitely has like a good outlook on how this season's going to go based on the interview. They told him they asked them, they're like, did they tell you anything specific? Like, hey, we want you working on this and this. And he's like, no, they told me to come in and compete and have fun. He's like, and I said, I can do that. So he's like, I'm not worried about trying to make the majors as quickly as possible or anything. It was more of I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to keep working on what I need to work on, and we will go from there. So I joke about about the stuff I just joked about, but um, I do think that he has like a pretty good outlook on how things are going so far in his time in the minors, and I think he definitely wants to be in the majors this year. I think he at one point thought last year he might actually be able to make it. Um, but I think as long as he can be somewhat competitive strike zone wise, it'll be hard to keep him out of the pen by the end of the year at the very least. The stuff is just ridiculous. And I will say a little video again, really small video to go off of, but it looks more in control than what I have seen with his delivery in the past. Not really falling off as hard to the side, um, kind of making his way downhill a little bit more effectively and more just in a more efficient manner. Now the guy is moving so fast that he's gonna spin off sometimes. He's got just ridiculous acceleration down the mound. I don't know how he moves the way he moves at his height. Um, but he's gonna have some issue with command. It's just always going to be there. It's hard for anybody with that type of stuff to not have it. DeGrom is an outlier. Um, you think back, even Max Scherzer early in his career, especially, he had plenty of walk issues, plenty of issues with that type of stuff, but he had such good stuff that he gets through it anyway. And you walk a couple guys, but you strike out the side, it really doesn't matter as much as if you walk a couple guys and you're Adrian Hauser. Um, it's just I'm very excited to watch him this year. I'm curious. I'm guessing he's going back to Biloxi Double A to start the year, but he could move quick if he shows any more improvement in command. So, Gunnar, you got any thoughts on Mizorowski, or you want to give us your next one?
Yeah, I got a couple. I think first you mentioned his what happens if he's not a good pitcher in baseball, and you probably just end up like me. I'm the example of that. When you suck at baseball, this is what happens. But no, he's got eye-popping stuff, and I think maybe working with our major league staff maybe changes a lot of stuff for him, even if it's just this spring, and he can kind of work through all that stuff and be a little bit more consistent with that. I could see him at least fixing a lot of what's his problems are, even if he's not with the major league staff immediately, as far as like And when I mean by major league staff, I'm talking about like coaches. Like he's working with the spring training guys and seeing everybody else he's working with, how they work, how they approach. We've changed a lot of people's career paths, just guys who don't have half the talent that he does. So if he can just work with our guys, fix his problems, all of those kinks out, get everything out that he had those problems with, even if he doesn't make the major leagues right away in opening day, which we don't expect, he can kind of carry that over to the minor leagues, and then maybe that'll make him come up faster, I think is kind of what I'm hoping for. So my last guy I wanted to point out was Joey Ortiz, who we just acquired in a trade for Corbin Burns. We just gotten a couple, not even a couple, we've gotten one maybe clip of him hitting, and I'm not going to compare him to this guy. I know I hyped him up to Spencer a little bit. From the video that we got, I thought maybe it looked a little bit like Ryan Braun's swing, which I'm not saying it's going to be Ryan Braun in any way. I think I already compared him to Kiki Hernandez, which I think that's probably more realistic as far as his swing, like what it actually looks like. I just thought it was funny in that one video. I'm like, he's kind of got the same motions as Ryan Braun does. And I gave Spencer a side-by-side video. Maybe we'll post that if I'm feeling a little risky about it and want to stir the pot on Twitter. Um, but I don't super believe in that, but I'm very excited about him in general. I think he could change a lot. Um, for our team this year, even if he hits a little bit, if he's just a league average hitter, I think he changes a lot because that's just kind of what we need out of third base right now. And we assume we'll talk about later maybe who's playing second and third, but we assume he'll be at third base at least to start the year, or second base. So that could change a lot for him. But one interview that we didn't talk about, which is not really spring training, but DL Hall, who he also was traded with. I think maybe you mentioned this, but I'll just reiterate it then again. But when he first got traded here, he mentioned how they asked him a question like, "Who is your most favorite underrated player in the system of the Orioles?" If you had to pick, so not guys like Gunnar Henderson or whoever else is big there. I'm
Jackson
blanking, but
Holiday.
yeah. So outside of those guys, who would you pick in that Orioles system as someone to watch? And he goes, well, actually, funny enough, I would have picked Joey Ortiz. Even though he's like a top 100 guy, he just always felt like he was overlooked talent-wise because of those other names. And he could be super, super good in his eyes, and he's excited to kind of be here with the Brewers. It's kind of ironic that he got traded with him. So that got me a lot more excited too. I already was excited about him, but just hearing that, I think it's kind of we talked about the players' perspectives and stuff like that. They know more than maybe like scouts do and stuff because they see him working every day and just maybe more of his raw talent wise. So if he can put it all together, I'm really excited about him. I think he even right now he feels kind of underrated with the Brewers because of all everybody else that we've gotten. Um, and we just don't know a ton about him. So I'm excited. I know you're probably excited, but did any of that stuff kind of raise your eyebrows a little bit?
Well, anytime you comp somebody to Ryan Braun, even slightly, I'm going to raise my eyebrows, Gunner. Um, no, I did forget about that. We talked about the Hall interviews, but we didn't really mention that part of it. Um, they asked him early on about the trade, and he even said he was like, "I'm excited that Hall's coming over, or that Ortiz is coming over too." He said he's been one of my like favorite players to play with, just because of the way he plays. He plays so hard. He thinks he's just an underrated player. And then when they came around and asked him again, like you said, he did choose him. He was like, "Well, I'm not." It's like it's kind of cheating. He's like, "But Ortiz would be my pick, even though he's leaving the organization." And um, now I'm sure there's some like, okay, there's probably some lip service because he is coming with you and all of this stuff. But to me, I don't think he needed to go into that much depth about how much he enjoyed being teammates with him and how much he thinks of him as a player. It could have just been like, yeah, it's cool to have somebody I know coming with, like get to experience this together, whatever. But he kind of took it a step further. And I will say his interviews, he's not very talkative. So the fact that he was willing to talk about Ortiz like that and actually drag on a little bit longer is kind of noteworthy to me too. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I was higher on Ortiz than most people from the beginning. I liked Ortiz as one of their prospects. Getting him again, Mayo probably would have been the guy I preferred between the two, but I would take Jory Ortiz in that trade and be pretty happy most times. So yeah, it's been good to see it. I think we should post the side by side just so people don't think you're insane. um,
It'll stir the pot, like I said, too. Worst
oh
case,
yeah,
we'll get the people talking.
yes. Okay, I'll just finish it off here. We got one more that we kind of one more noteworthy thing before we get into the real big noteworthy thing that came out a couple days ago. Um, and that's that Wes Clark is going to be catching for at least the beginning portion of spring here. We've talked about Clark a decent amount, actually. We talked about it when Jack was on. I don't really think he's going to be able to catch at the major league level. I think he's going to be more of like an emergency catcher option. He just, I don't think he has the arm for it more than anything else. He has good hands. I think he could probably receive decently enough. I mean, the bat would play as a catcher for sure. It's very interesting that they're giving him this chance, though. Now, I guess on the Gary Sanchez thing, we could argue that they just are short a catcher from what they were expecting to have in camp, and now they want to get a guy, at least give him the chance to show what he can do while also having enough catchers to kind of handle the load that comes with all of this bullpen catching and games and all that stuff. But I think it's notable still. And I do think it's a sign that they believe get him with these major league catching instructors who have been able to work magic on a lot of guys and see what happens. And his value does go up significantly if he can be a backup catcher at the MLB level. Like it's way different. Um, so if he can handle it and his arm is at least good enough to hold guys somewhat accountable. Now, you look at it, Caratini couldn't throw anybody out last year. It was awful. Um, Even Contreras was like a 17% caught stealing rate, which is not very good. The new rules also just kind of, in a way, give stolen bases to the other team. So if you don't have a cannon, the difference between somebody with an okay arm and a bad arm is probably smaller than it used to be because you're not catching guys either way. Um, that's why Cairo could be very, very good because he's got a legitimately borderline elite arm. I found it super interesting. I know I like him as a hitter. I think he could hit at the MLB level with power. I gave him the Rhys Hoskins comp. If he's a catcher, it's just a way different profile and one that seems a lot more feasible to actually kind of stick in the majors for a long time. Um, but yeah, Gunnar, you got any thoughts on Clark?
Not a ton. I just think your value-wise point was really true. Just us being able to turn catch guys who are iffy at catcher and turning them into catchers. We just talked about how it's hard to acquire catchers like that, and using that as kind of like a tool for us to be able to trade maybe later on. And here we have a catcher for you that we just worked and turned into a catcher. That's huge for trade value-wise.
Yeah, well, kind of along the same lines of moving, changing, trying different positions. Like I said, probably the biggest news we've gotten so far came from Ken Rosenthal, actually, who reported that in November of 2023, so last November, Pat Murphy arranged for Sal Frelick to learn infield from Dustin Pedroia, who Murphy actually coached in college back in the day. And then we got a little video of Sal taking a rep at third base yesterday from the Brewers Twitter account. But Gunnar, I guess first question, do you think this is kind of a good idea, bad idea? What kind of possibilities could this open up for the Brewers if he's legitimately able to play second or third base?
It's always a good idea to at least try it if he can actually be okay there. Somebody actually pointed out to Mookie Betts when he moved to second base, he's been like a negative on defense actually. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't follow the Dodgers. I saw that somewhere on Twitter, so I don't know. But it's like I think he could handle it. It's just can he be like a zero on defense? And what I mean by that is just kind of average. I think that's going to be a huge plus for us. Me and you kind of looked more at kind of the roster outlook because we're going to be doing that soon here. I think a Garrett, Joey Weimer, right field makes some sense, and that's not going to. They talked about Sal's going to be primarily in the outfield too, so it's not going to be like they're straight like Sal's the second baseman or the third baseman this season. It's going to be just when it makes sense, it makes sense. We'll put him out there to get other guys at bats, but I think a Garrett Joey combination in right field because Garrett and Sal kind of cancel each other out. And as far as they're both left-handed bats, we trust Sal more in the outfield. So where does Garrett find his way? How does Garrett even play at this point? It doesn't make a ton of sense. So I think that would open up some doors for him at least to kind of clear up that log jam. I think third base shocked me more than just trying him out at second base. You mentioned to me how he had a through like 95 plus from the outfield. So the arm strength is there. It's just third base is a whole different animal of ground balls. How can you move laterally? Throwing on your back foot. It's not like you get the run into your throws in the outfield and stuff like that. So He's got it in him for sure. I just would like to see some grounders at third base instead of some slow rollers, like you said. Um, but having that in the back of your pocket to be able to go to, as long as he's, like I said, average there, that's going to be a huge plus for us if we get into sort of a situation where, let's say, Garrett is smashing the ball and he's somehow surprised us all and he's playing. Well, then how does this all work? How can we play all these guys? That would be an option to kind of make it work. So, um, I'm sure you got similar thoughts, but how you feeling about this?
Yeah, I think, well, first, I got to point out that somebody asked us about this in the mailbag episode, and Jack and I both
Hmm.
kind of just blew it off. Um, to me, he actually didn't. I actually thought he played it in college at Boston College. He never played in the infield at Boston College. He played some second base in his college summer league, like his wood bat leagues that he was doing, um, which were high level. I mean, that's high level baseball. It's some of the better players from college. So he got good reps there, I'm sure, but not playing it at all in the minors, not playing it at all for real in college. I was not expecting to hear this. I would say Dustin Pedroia is a pretty good guy to learn from if you're learning, especially second base. Um, for me, Pedroia was one of those guys who I learned a lot of baseball stuff from growing up, just from his interviews and things like that. Uh, well, first of all, I'll say this. This is probably the player my dad and I disagreed on the most. My dad hates Dustin Pedroia with a passion. I don't really know why, but I loved Dustin Pedroia. And people actually used to call me Dustin Pedroia sometimes in Little League and stuff. Um, but I learned a ton of baseball knowledge from him because he was just a scrappy dude who ended up, I mean, he won an MVP. But I learned so much about like backing up bases as a second baseman from him. Um, the way he thought about the game, he always was really good about talking about that stuff in interviews, and that was how I nerded out about playing baseball when I was younger, was to watch guys that I respected and learn from what they said and how they did things. So for me, this is the type of guy you want someone to learn from, someone who kind of battled through all of the he's too small, he doesn't have the best arm, he doesn't do all this stuff. Like he won an MVP with all of that. Um, and it was a legitimate MVP too. It wasn't like some, I mean, he at least was a very good candidate for that MVP. I think that if Frelick can play second base and do it decent enough to play and to legitimately be able to handle it, I would consider it being a long-term situation for him. Now, I would still want him playing the outfield. He's a good outfielder defensively. But with the logjam and everything that's been kind of created in the outfield right now, second base to me is the most open spot on the roster, depending on Tyler Black, Joey Ortiz, how all of that stuff works out. I don't trust Bryce Terang. To me, this is a sign that the Brewers, I shouldn't even say, this is yet another sign that the Brewers don't trust Bryce Terang. Half of the offseason moves have pretty much pointed to the fact that they don't trust Bryce Terang. Um, you can go back to the trade with the Phillies to get Oliver Dunn. I think that was a sign of we want to bring in some competition. The Joey Ortiz thing is a sign that, yeah, we want some more competition. Saying Tyler Black might see some time at second base is a sign that they don't trust Bryce Terang to be the second baseman. Monasterio spent time at second last year. Now you bring in the possibility of Frelick taking reps at second. They do not trust Bryce Terang, and I don't blame them one bit. He is a very good defender, but and we've talked about this a lot. I'm not going to rip on Bryce a bunch here, but um, the bat I just don't see the bat playing at any point. And I do see Frelick's bat playing, and I see it playing much better as a second baseman. If you can be a good defender at second and have an above average bat, like you're a borderline all-star at that spot because there's just not that many good second basemen in baseball. Um, if you're a good outfielder and you have a solid bat, that just makes you an okay outfielder. It's a good outfielder. It's a guy who starts for most teams, but there's more value, I think, to being able to play infield, which is why Mookie going there and being a net. I looked it up. He's like -1 outs above average over the last 3 years. At second, like that's totally fine. That's basically a net average guy. Um, if Frelick can be that type of guy, totally different outlook on the roster in general. And I don't know. I don't see that being the case where he's starting every day. But again, I think it really is just a sign that they want to try everything they can to one, make room for all of these guys that they have in the outfield depth, and two, find somebody that they trust more than Bryce Terang. So I will say this. There are guys on every baseball team at every level who are just pure athletes and they can do this and they can just move around and just handle every spot on the diamond. And it's always very interesting to see it, but you almost always find these guys over the course of a season on your team. He seems like the guy who would be that type of player. Unbelievably fun quarterback to watch in high school, really good hockey player in high school, just a really, really good all around athlete. That's the type of guy who would probably be able to make this work. And there was actually a good article on Brewer Fanatic today. I want to say it was written by, um, what's his name? Well, it was about Sal Frelick. I'll find his name here while I'm talking. Jake McKibben. He wrote an article about Frelick and the fact that, and I've talked about this a little bit, but the fact that he believes the thumb issue played a really, really big role in him not quite being the hitter that people might have expected right away last year. He had a great graphic kind of showing his AAA exit velocities in different zones in 2022 versus last year when he was dealing with the thumb stuff. And it was a small sample in 2022, but he had a ball 109.2 on the inner half. He didn't do anything close to that last year. He was hitting balls in all quadrants of the zone up in the mid 90s, up into the mid 100s. Last year, if you look at it across the board, there's only down the middle was in the 90s. Everything else was kind of in the 80s. He has more in the bat. Now, I don't think he's going to be a big homer guy, but he has more line drive gap power than we saw last year. And I don't think he had the same bat speed that he had the year before. We're talking about a lot of guys who are coming off health issues. We've talked about it with Hoskins, Ashby, even Yelich is back. I mean, just a lot of people that we're talking about Gary Sanchez potentially. If you get healthy seasons out of a lot of these guys, I think you're going to see improvements just because of that. I think they're just going to be better players because they are healthier. And I believe that that is going to be a big deal for Frelick. And if he can hit and then play second base, I mean, that's a super, super valuable player. So it's interesting. I think it just creates more and more options, which the Brewers are a team that just loves to have as many possible options as you can have. So I'm excited. I want to see him. I hope he actually gets legitimate reps there in games in spring so we can kind of see how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't hate the Brewers putting out a little more video of him maybe fielding a real grounder at some point. Hint, hint. But yeah, I think he's the type of athlete who can handle this type of move. And being shorter does help in the infield. Like moving a Garrett Mitchell or a Joey Weimer, a big dude, to the infield's a lot less likely to work than someone who's played some infield and kind of has the profile to be an infielder. So, yeah, Gunnar, any other thoughts on Frelick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. Hitting's hitting. I think he just needs to hit the ball harder. But that's not what we're talking about. It's his defense, and I think he can definitely handle it. His size definitely matters too. I think that's a really good point. Which is kind of why I thought he projected more at second base, but third base is why I was shocked. But we just seem to see some grounders and stuff like that, and this is the time to try it now for sure. I think this is kind of when we started to try out Ryan Braun at first base, if I'm talking about Ryan Braun. So
Oh yeah.
just put him in games. Why not? I mean, let's just see what he's got, and you got nothing to lose right now, so who cares? But while we're on Sal Frelick, this did just pop in my head. We did get some other news with him from Ken Rosenthal. He threw out the Padres, Kim, I don't remember his first name. Couldn't even pronounce it.
Sung Kim.
Yeah, there you go. He's been in trade rumors a lot recently. And Ken mentioned that I don't know if we were in talks with the Padres fully, or he just heard Sal's name kind of be thrown around with the Padres, or the Padres have been throwing Sal's name around as they want him from us. But do you make anything of those trade talks? Do you think that's us engaging in that type of trade? Is that the Padres engaging in their need of an outfielder? Would you enjoy Kim on the Brewers for Sal if that was what the trade was? What do you got?
Well, first I should say I think it was the Padres beat writer that was writing this story for the Athletic. Um, Frelick for Kim straight up would not interest me, and I like Kim a lot. I actually talked to you earlier in the offseason about possibly bringing him in somehow. I did think at the time he had 2 years left on his deal. This will be his last year, so that makes me a lot more hesitant to give him anything of real value. For me, I would be willing to make that part of a package where Kim comes back in the deal and you also get an interesting prospect as part of the deal, something along those lines. Like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But to me, I think the biggest thing here is that I do think this is a Padres point of view they're the team who came to the Brewers asking about Frelick. And they even said that in the article, kind of. They said Jaron Duran and Frelick, they've reached out to those teams to try and talk about them, see to gauge interest. And then in the article, they said both those teams are going to want a lot for those two players. This is not something where it's going to be yeah, we'll give you 6 years of Sal Frelick or Jaron Duran and just give us a 1 year of Hassan Kim. Like, no, that it wouldn't be a one for one type of deal. Um, Honestly, the Red Sox and the Brewers are both kind of in a similar spot where they're trying to compete while also building for the future. So that doesn't really make sense for either of them. I think it's more just the Padres are really searching out a center fielder right now. And those two names are names that are kind of in a roster crunch, weird situation, but both teams can make them work. So they don't have a reason to just make the trade to make the trade. I don't think we see Frelick move. If we do, the Padres do feel like the team that would make the most sense in a lot of ways. So I guess I wouldn't be 100% shocked if they saw it, but I do think him actually learning infield is a sign that they're trying to find a lot of ways to make it work with the group they have. And I would be more surprised now than I was 4 days ago when this original trade rumor came out. But yeah, Gunnar, I know we probably view Sal a little bit differently. To me, well, I think we both have the idea that the floor is probably the highest, right? Of these, maybe not even Churio, but of the Weimer, Mitchell, that group, Frelick probably has the highest floor. Ceiling wise, though, I think we would both probably agree that it's not the highest of those guys. I just think I probably view it as a higher ceiling than you. But how do you kind of look at Frelick and his value or potential or anything, any way you want to take it there?
Hmm. As far as this trade goes, even I wouldn't do this trade one for one. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. You mentioned like how he's a rental. Had a very valuable season last year. I think he would help us a lot this year. It's just we don't necessarily need to, and we talked about all the reasons why that we don't need to. We're not in a position to trade one of our young outfielders, even though it seems like it because it's a quote log jam. I just wouldn't trade out of that bunch right now, especially for a rental. And I don't think Sal's the one out of that bunch to be trading because of that low floor like we talked about. I mentioned his hitting. I think if he can just find a way to hit the ball harder, and he's never going to be a huge power guy. He's going to be a guy if he can shoot it in the gaps, and that's his power, and he can hit a bunch of doubles and have a high average and walk. That's awesome. That's exactly what we need. It's kind of like what Yelich is right now, almost, if he's not even hitting for power. Because Yelich was even very valuable in that. It's just Yelich is disappointing because he's not the 2018, 19, 2020 Yelich that he was. But I think that's kind of where his salary or his value kind of lies, is where Yelich is right now. I think that can kind of be what Sal could be in the future. And yeah, I think we just need to see it. And hopefully, with him being healthy, I could definitely see that being a possibility for him. Our last topic here that we also thought about sort of last second, but Rob Manfred did still discuss how he was thinking about having an off-season free agent signing period, which if you look at it timeline wise, it'd probably end around, I would guess, the winter meetings or December. I think he even talked about. Spencer, who would you kind of see in this benefit if this did happen? Who would this not benefit if this went down and was a thing?
It would benefit the owners and it would not benefit the players. Um, which is why Manfred is suggesting it, and I'm sure it's an owner-driven suggestion. It would be extremely, I should say, the fans would probably benefit from this too. It would be extremely entertaining. It would be more like what we see in like the NBA free agency, where that clock hits and it's Ersan Ilyasova just signed with the Bucks for 1 year, $7 million. Like that type of deal comes out right away. We see everything kind of happen in that first week of the offseason. The issue with comparing those types of things with that and the NFL, where it's very similar too, like clock strikes and the NFL free agent deals start hitting right away. There's a salary cap in those sports. It is a much, much different. There are max contracts in those sports. There are no max contracts in baseball. There are no different salary levels for different types of service time, different types of whatever. Like it's all open. Once you hit free agency, you can get any contract you want. We saw it with Shohei. We'll see it in the future with other guys where it's going to be some insane contract that, I mean, you can do anything you want with a baseball contract. The issue players are going to have with it is that when they look at things through their lens, it's going to be you're trying to force us into signing deals that we don't want to sign. And I know people are tired of hearing about how players deserve to get paid, and I know everyone thinks they're getting paid too much, or not everyone, but a lot of people are just tired of hearing players complain about pay when they're like, you're making hundreds of millions of dollars. I get it. I do. But their job as players and their job as, like, I don't like Scott Boras, but his job is to do what he's doing, drive up prices for the future, make future players make even more money. The owners can afford this. I promise you they can. The owners can afford to pay these players. I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel bad for the players either. All of them are going to be rich beyond their wildest dreams. The ones who hit free agency at least are, um, because they're the ones who are going to make real money and have already probably hit 6 years of service time money where you're making plenty of money along that whole journey as well. It's never going to happen. It's a fun idea in terms of, like I said, entertainment value, but I don't even know that I think it's a good idea in general. And I, I wouldn't hate seeing it because, again, it would be entertaining, but I give it a 0% chance of happening. I don't think it happens unless MLB makes some sweeping changes to how everything operates, which includes a salary cap. And if that happens, players are already going to be probably going on a strike. So I don't see any of this stuff happening. But Gunnar, I know, like, first instinct is definitely to think, hey, this would be fun. But
Yeah.
kind of what are your thoughts on it now that you've probably thought about it a little bit more than the first initial tweet you saw?
Yeah, I texted you. I said this would be a great idea because I'm thinking in the fans' perspective of, look, if we think about NBA, like you mentioned, NFL, that's different too, a little bit. Even so, guys still hold out and stuff for contracts. I think part of it is some of these players do play the long game on purpose to get more money. So eliminating that whole extra month or two where they do play the long game hurts them. And also something that you mentioned, I want to get your opinion on it because you told this to me and it kind of sparked my idea was the Brewers specifically. You think about some of the guys that we've signed over the years. Matt Garza, I think Kyle Loesch was even like later in the offseason. We kind of get to eat people's crumbs a little bit off their plate. Like, oh, you're waiting this long on this guy. We'll kind of jump in at the last second and steal him from you because now that's kind of our advantage that we get to use on you guys. So what did you kind of feel that same way with the Brewers specifically? I think this rule change would definitely specifically hurt the Brewers as far as free agents because let's say it is more of a condensed period. You would probably see a lot of those higher markets just be able to be like, you know what, we got to throw all of our money at this guy and this guy. Well, then who are we left with? I think maybe a guy like Rhys Hoskins actually might have been gone already at that point. Someone would have just said, you know what, we got to get him. We got to get him right now. What does he want? 20 plus million? We'll do it.
Yep.
That eliminates the Brewers out of that conversation at that point. So is that kind of how you felt about the Brewers specifically?
I did think that at first glance it would probably hurt the Brewers. Honestly, you look back at every free agent signing they've made, like legitimate one. You pointed out Garza and Loesch; those were definitely pretty close to spring training. Um, Lorenzo Cain was end of February or end of January. Yasmani Grandal was mid to late January. Rhys Hoskins was mid to late January. Like, even Gary Sanchez being out on the market right now is part of the reason we might be signing him. It's the Brewers like to wait out the market and like to see how everything goes, and then yeah, you it's kind of scraps or crumbs if you want to call it that way, but like really, it's just they're finding value, and these are good players. All these guys I'm naming, well, not Matt Garza, but most of the players I'm naming are good players, and they got them for probably less than they were expecting to at the beginning of the offseason because other teams kind of burnt through their budget, weren't as good a fit for them. Once the ones who did have money maybe didn't have a great fit for Hoskins or Yaz or whatever. Like, it gives them the opportunity to get players they like without completely breaking the bank. And I think that's the best mix is that teams who want to spend can spend. Any team could have gone out and given Hoskins 25 million for a year and been like, hey, take this deal, come play for us for a year and then leave. Anyone could have done that at any point in the offseason. There might have been more pressure to if we were in a month-long thing, like you said. But I also wonder about, like, guys don't sign. Now they have to wait until spring to sign. That's the point of why it's hard on position players. They don't want to, or not position play, but on the players in general. They either sign early where they're pretty much forced into whatever their best offer is at that time. And they have no more, like, they don't have any more wiggle room. Or you have to wait until spring training when you're going to be behind. You're going to be coming into the clubhouse late. You're going to be doing all these things. Like, they don't want to be in that position either. So that's why it forces them into this tough spot. And for me, the way it works right now is the best for everybody. I know the Boris Four or whatever they're calling them at the moment are kind of throwing everyone for a loop. We have not seen this before where this many good players are unsigned into spring training. I don't think it's going to be something we continue to see. My guess is a lot of players are learning from what's happening with those four and saying, all right, I mean, this is getting a little ridiculous. We can't afford to wait this long. They might actually wouldn't shock me if they're getting worse offers than they were early in the offseason right now, because teams know they're up against the clock. So I think you're going to see teams, and I just don't think there's any real reason to do this. I think right now everything works fine. It would be fun, but I don't think it's logical or something that could actually work. So, yeah, I mean, I don't hate when they bring out ideas like this. Like, this is at least a reasonable thought to bring out and be like, hey, maybe this would make sense. And then you think about it and it's like, well, no, but that's how it should be. It should be something where it's like, I could maybe see it. And then you think about it, maybe not. Or, oh, I could see it. Maybe we should try this. Like, that's what the way it should go, instead of saying things like, well, Oakland fans will be fine because they have Giants in the Bay Area, so why do they need a team? Like, no, Rob, that's not how it works. That's like saying we moved to Milwaukee, but they could just be Cubs fans. No, that's that's not. So Rob said something that was at least somewhat reasonable here, and then other times he does other things. But yeah, any other closing thoughts on that one, Gunner?
No.
All right.
Thanks, Rob.
We'll close it up with a few odds and ends. I think I want to get your thoughts on this first one, though. So we did hear that Keston Hiura is signing a minor league deal with the Detroit Tigers. So I guess first glance, how's that kind of fit for him? You think he'll get an opportunity at all? Um, I have a feeling he's going to be a Toledo Mud Hens favorite, but I don't know how much the Tigers are going to see him. But Gunnar, what are your thoughts?
Maybe they'll try him out, and if he's got a hot spring, they might use him. But at the same point, it's spring training kind of feels like almost a AAA type of vibe sometimes. Like if he has a big spring, what does that really prove Keston here as? So he's going to have some bigger adjustments, I think, to be able to crack the major league level to where they're like, okay, you've definitely changed something in your swing, your approach, something that's changed about you to make us more confident in you. He had a nice post on Instagram too. I guess we should shout him out. And he, we talked about the mental side of it too. I think being this big prospect and having your huge kind of rookie season, I guess. I mean, it was a rookie season, and he was part of a playoff run that ended very shortly, but it was a really good team. It felt like he was on this super good path, and he was going to be a big part of this team, and maybe like in the middle of the order for a lot of years to come. All of a sudden, the door slams on you, and you're no longer part of the plans or anything like that. It did seem like he was obviously he's going to be very upset by that, but he's handled it all pretty well. There's nothing that he's no signs of him being a bad teammate. You don't really hear anything about him in AAA of complaining. He just kind of did his work last year and sat through it and performed really well in AAA. So nothing you can really bash him for. It just was a really unfortunate situation that I think it was a little bit of major league pitching kind of caught up to him and really exploited all of his problems, and he just didn't really have a counterpunch for it to where he's like, okay, I can throw this at you now, and I can make this adjustment. He just never had the adjustment to what they did. So I will always remember 2019. It was a lot of great memories. The Cubs walk-off home run was fun. He did seem like I said, I probably one of my favorite players at that point. I felt like he was going to be a huge part of this team and just wasn't. So the whole situation sucks. I hope he gets an opportunity, but we don't expect it, but enjoy it. So I know you'd never, I mean, you did like Keston here
Oh,
probably in the same way, but recently he frustrated you.
I loved Keston. When he first came up, I loved Keston. I loved him as a prospect. I went to Appleton to watch him after he got drafted. I was pumped about Keston Hiura. Um, Defense was awful always. That was going to be fine because he was hitting. If he hit like he did in 2019, the defense was going to be fine. He probably would be our first baseman.
With a DH coming too in the future, I mean, he had the window.
Right. He just you can't strike out as much as he did in the majors. And you especially can't do it when you can't do anything else. Like, yes, he hit for some power in 2021, two, it would have been, right? The
Hmm.
year everyone was mad.
Yeah.
And I will say this, what you talked about with his attitude, I pointed out on Twitter a few times. Like, I was hard on Keston as a Brewer towards the end. but I pointed out a number of times that he could not have been handling things better than he did. Not only was he going through the stuff on the field, but his mom was having health problems, and there just had to be so much on his mind. And you never heard one complaint. You never heard any like he went down to AAA and he was a clubhouse issue. He was like, no, the guy did everything. He was a pros pro the entire time. Like huge tip of the cap to him for that because that's not easy. But he just Brewer fans can say whatever they want and blame the organization for not giving him chances. He got DFA'd and not one team claimed him. I am certain the Brewers tried to trade him at the deadline last year. Not one team traded for him. He's signing a minor league deal with one of the worst teams in baseball from last year. The Brewers are not the only team who see these issues and see concern with him. They are not the only team who, if he does figure things out, should be blamed for missing out on him. In fact, nobody should be. The entire league sees him the same way the Brewers do, which is a quad A player right now with some potential in the bat still. He absolutely still has the potential to hit, but I just don't. I hope he does. I really do, because again, I think as a person, he has done everything exactly right, and those people deserve to be rewarded. But until you see legitimate changes, he's going to get stuck in a rut where it's like, yeah, he's so good in AAA, but how do we trust that it's good in MLB? Because it hasn't been when he goes up there. Um, I honestly thought his best route was going to be to take like the Eric Thames type route and head on over. Jack talked about it a little bit on his when we had him on, but head on over to Asia, play for a couple of years, see a bunch of spin, see a bunch of different stuff, see if you maybe work on that type of work on hitting against that type of pitching, and maybe you come back and you really are improved. And then Eric Thames turned into at least 3 years of really good hitting at the MLB level, or at least average or better. I thought that might be his best move, but I don't blame him for taking one more chance on a team that maybe has a spot for him to see some at bats this year. The tough part is first base is Spencer Torkelson. He is not that dissimilar to Keston at the moment. But their offense was terrible last year, so I could see him getting like DH at bats and maybe getting a chance in that way. So I hope he does. I hope he runs with it. I hope he does well. I'm glad he got at least another chance in affiliated ball if that's what he wanted, but I just have a lot of doubts on whether that's going to actually work out. Okay, one more thing, just kind of odds and ends stuff. So they did come out with the TV broadcast schedule for spring. There's going to be 8 games total, which maybe I'm misremembering, but that feels really light to me.
That's what I was gonna say. There's no way we definitely had more than 8 games.
Yeah. So Thursday, February 27th against the Angels, the 28th against the Cubs, March 2nd against the Dodgers, and then almost 2 weeks between games on TV. So it's March 15th against the D-backs, 17th against the Royals, 18th against the Angels, 23rd against the Cubs, and 24th against the Diamondbacks. So I was hoping we'd get a chance to see a lot more of spring. Maybe they'll do like some web. They've done that in the past where they'll do like it'll just be like one crappy camera view, but you'll at least get to see where the ball goes and stuff off the bat on like a web type of broadcast. But I was surprised that only being 8 and only 4 are technically Bally, Wisconsin, and then 4 of them will be like the other team's broadcast that they'll show on Bally, Wisconsin. So yeah, I that's all I really had on that. I'm just surprised that it's only 8. But yeah, Gunnar, why don't we finish off with our random Brewers? Who you got?
I went with his brother, Matt Gamble. We were familiar with Ben Gamble more recently, but for those of you who are older, remember Matt Gamble. I was excited for Matt Gamble in 2009. He had a big rookie campaign, or like I said, he was probably a month or 2 in the season, but he was at the end of that season. He had a really big kind of couple months there hitting wise. So he got me excited, and then you didn't really see him for the next couple of years just because based on our roster and things like that. I thought he's going to be a lot bigger part of our future. And then, of course, the door opens up for him completely when Prince Fielder leaves. So I'm like, oh, yeah, he's ready to go now. And then he didn't have really the greatest of start that first month. And then I guess off the top of my memory, I think it was the Padres game. He went back for a foul ball and shredded his knee against the walling or whatever they had there. And then you never saw him again, really. So tough. We saw his brother. We got a Gamble in replace of him a couple of years later, but I was just excited for him. And it's funny how I always felt like, oh, he's like a third baseman. Like he was seemed like kind of like an athletic guy in 2009, and then in 2012 he was like more of a broader guy. Like he was like ready for some power. I'm like, oh, this is like he's gonna have a huge season, and then nothing happened. So, yeah, just excited. I wonder what his prospect ranking. He's had to be a top 100 prospect, I bet. But
He was a
he,
big one, yeah.
yeah, so he was probably one of our few big ones back then. So, yeah, that's all I got on him.
Yeah, no, it is in a way sad that I keep seeing Ben Gamble sign with teams, and it's like Matt Gamble was the more talented brother of the
Hmm.
two, and he just never was able to get his career off the ground because of injuries. I mean, he probably would have been up more early on, but I think he was battling a lot of injuries in like 2010 and 2011 in the minors too, or at least 2010. I know he did. Um, so yeah, I was excited to see him get his chance in 2012, like you said, and then it became a run of no first baseman between Prince and really Thames, I guess.
I guess
Although
Casey McGee kind of closed his door a little bit too
he
because
did,
he had the huge 2010 season as well. So if he's hurt and plus that happening, that's gonna
yeah,
slam that door.
true. All right, and then my pick for this one was Derek Turnbow. So Turnbow had one of the most up and down 2 year stretches you could possibly have as a member of a baseball team. He was the Brewer. I mean, he made an All-Star appearance for the Brewers. Ironically, it was in the year that he was not very good overall. He actually, in 2006, he was an All-Star. In 2005, he did not make the All-Star team. One of those years, he had a 1.74 ERA. One of them, he had a 6.87 ERA. He made the All-Star team the year he had a 6.87 ERA. That I believe is the year I got my Derek Turnbow bobblehead that's sitting over to the right of me. I was at that game. He blew the save. Everyone ripped the heads off the bobbleheads and threw them on the field. It was rough. People were fed up with Derek at that point. Um, that bobblehead had real hair on it, which is the weirdest thing ever, but had real hair on it, so a little creepy. But no, just a really up and down few years, and then he stuck around for a couple more, but it was rough. Um, but an incredible 2005, genuinely just an insane season. Um, but yeah, he was also probably kind of a known roid head type guy, pretty big. People didn't love him in the clubhouse everywhere he went, and definitely had some steroid stuff going on, it seemed like. But yeah, it was a fun 2005. Yeah, so that'll finish it off. So for those of you listening, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod, and please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
So yeah.